Hello everybody, welcome back to another exciting edition of Ed Puzzle Notes. And this is going to be one of the last of our Ed Puzzle Notes. Maybe one, maybe two at the most more, and that's it. Next year you're going to be so sad when you're sitting in silence taking notes and somebody's lecturing. No more Ed Puzzle Notes where you can have a little bit of fun. Anyways, this is you do not have to do this assignment. It's non-mandatory. If you want to research these pieces of evidence on your own, do it. If you want to use the evidence that I have taped on the back lab tables, do it. If there's groups that they won't move because they think that's their lab table, no, those are my lab tables. So they ain't going to move. You tell me, I'll move them. Trust me. And if you have no notes by the end of this class period, SYAL. I think we all know what that means. See you at lunch if your grade is that. So all you have to do today is do your assignments, and even if you have that not really good grade, you won't have to see me at lunch. But if you want to be lazy, then yeah, I'll see you at lunch. Anyways, fossils. These are the preserved remains or imprints of ancient organisms. Dinosaurs. How do we know that there were dinosaurs on Earth about 65, 70 million years ago? There was nobody there. No humans were there to take pictures of them because guess what? There weren't any cameras. And even if there were humans there to draw cave drawings, humans weren't alive then. They were not a species then. The only way we know that dinosaurs walked the Earth, they left fossils. They left fossilized bones that scientists, archaeologists could put together and say, whoa, this is a T-Rex. And now these fossils, depending on how old they are, well, there's this law of superposition. So basically that means if you're an archaeologist like this guy or this girl, and say you dig down 3 feet, you might find, your neighbor's dead cat that he buried 5 years ago. But if you keep going down, maybe, 50, 70 feet, okay, now you might find a saber-toothed tiger that lived 10,000 years ago. And if you keep digging deeper and deeper, if you get over 1,000 feet, whoa, now you might be finding the dinosaurs. So as you go down and down and down, you can actually see how species evolve and change over time. For example, if you look at modern whales, obviously they do not have legs, but if you go back about 30 million years ago, 35 million years ago, they did have legs. Now, their legs weren't strong enough to allow them to walk, but they did have legs. Now, if you go back 45, 50 million years ago, they totally had legs. Whales had legs, and they looked kind of like a hippo. So, the fossil evidence, if you look, at different eras, at different time scales, you can see how organisms change over time. And obviously, the deeper you go, the older the organism is, the older the fossil is. All right, and just look at some fossilized. Here's a fossilized footprint, so that dinosaur actually stepped in the mud, and then that mud became fossilized because minerals got into the mud and it turned into hard rock. This, of course, is the fossilized bones of a T-Rex, which has been put back together. If it weren't for these fossilized bones, we would have no clue that dinosaurs were even around. And these are some old fossilized. That's a ancestor of humans. And as millions of years passed, they became more and more human. So that's evidence of evolution. Here's some sort of sea snail. Those, of course, are the fossilized imprints of plants. No clue what that is, but it is a fossil. So, fossils, evidence of evolution, because they show you how organisms change over time. You can look at their fossils and see how they change over time, and that's what evolution is. Now the structures. These structures are going to be the most important evidence of evolution, in my opinion. Why? Because there's going to be more questions on the structures than anything else. So the first one are called homologous structures. Homologous. These are structures which have the same basic parts. So usually they have the same bones, the same bone structure, but they serve different functions. Now this is evidence of something called divergent evolution. So this is evidence that we had a common ancestor, and then at somewhere along the line we diverged and became two separate species. And then these guys could also diverge and become separate species. So this is divergent evolution. So it implies that the organisms had a common ancestor, like that little guy right there. But because of different environmental factors, different conditions, they evolved in different ways. And we're going to show you a couple examples of these on the next slide. All right, so these are all homologous structures. These are all vertebrates. This is the front limb, front leg of an elephant. This is the front flipper of a porpoise, which is kind of like a dolphin. This is the wing of a bird, and this is the arm of a human. Now, if you look, the bones are all about the same. They all have a humerus. They all have a radius and an ulna, two bones, a radius and an ulna. Boom, boom. They all have metacarpals, which are your wrist bones. And then they all have carpals and phalanges, or actually fingers. So you can see even the porpoise, even though he has a flipper, he still has finger bones. Same thing with this elephant. He still has finger bones, phalanges. So, even though these things have very different jobs, for example, like the porpoise's flipper, that thing is not good for grabbing things. I guarantee you, porpoises could not grab things with their flippers, but they're excellent for swimming. The human arm, great for grabbing things, your pencils. Sometimes you guys grab pencils and write stuff. The bird's wing, not good for grabbing stuff, but great for flying. Not quite as good for swimming. Our arms, even though it has the same basic bone structure as the bird, our arms obviously are not good for flying. So homologous structures, they have the same internal structure, but they serve a different function. Swimming, flying, grabbing. And this is evidence that we all shared a common ancestor and we branched off into separate species. Obviously, Mr. Porpoise decided to live in the water. That's why his hand, so to speak, turned into a flipper. For some reason, birds evolved a different way and they got wings to fly. So that's what divergent evolution is. We share a common ancestor. That's why we have the same bone structures. But we've evolved to these things having different functions because we live in different environments. Now, analogous structures will be the exact opposite. I'm going to ask you a question. Right here, we have a bottlenose dolphin. And right here, we have Carcharian carcharias, a great white shark. Question is, who is more closely related? The dolphin to humans or the dolphin to the shark? So who's more closely related to each other? The dolphin with us or the dolphin with the shark? I'm curious to hear your answer. Well, of course, the answer to that is Mrs. Dolphin here. Obviously, that's a Mrs. because there's her baby right there. She is much closer related to us than she is to Mr. Shark. Mr. Shark is a fish, and not even a bony fish. He's a cartilaginous fish, so he doesn't have bones. Mrs. Dolphin here is a mammal, just like us. We're mammals, so we are much closer related to the dolphin than the dolphin is to the shark. But the question is, why do dolphins kind of look like sharks? They have the same kind of like body. They have a dorsal fin. They have two pectoral fins. They have a caudal fin, just like the shark. Shark has all that same stuff too. So why does the dolphin look more like the shark than it does us? Well, that's something called convergent evolution. And that is, these two things are not closely related. They do not share a common recent ancestor. But since they both live in the ocean, they've evolved similar traits. So they look somewhat the same. Since they both are in the same environmental factors, they both evolved their streamlined body. They both evolved flippers or fins. That's why they look somewhat the same. So analogous structures are body parts with the same function, but these things are not closely related. They have different structures. Another classic example of an analogous structure are the wings of birds and the wings on bugs or insects. We both know they have the same function. Wings are used for flying, but birds and bugs or insects, they're not even closely related to each other. So that's convergent evolution. Even though they don't share a recent common ancestor, they have evolved the same function of flying. And the last type of structures, so we had homologous structures, like the arm of a human and the wing of a bat. Same bones, same like bone structure, but different functions. Our arm is for grabbing things. The wing of a bat is for flying. We had analogous structures. Different structures, but the same function, like the wing of a bug and the wing of a bird. Both are for flying, but they're not even closely related. They just evolve similar characteristics. The last one's a vestigial structure. Vestigial. These are structures that are still present, but serve no apparent function. So why in the world do we have these structures if we don't need them? So one example, some people will say these are not vestigial structures. I will argue with them. The appendix in humans. Why do we have an appendix? If you have appendicitis, the doctors cut it out, you don't need it. Well, why do we have it? Well, we used to need it. According to the theory, back when we were living in the trees, if this is a tree, when we were living in the trees, back then, we could grab off leaves and eat them. Now we can still grab off leaves off a tree and eat it, but we'll get zero nutrition from it. We cannot digest leaves. We cannot digest cellulose. But back when we had our fully developed, it wasn't called an appendix, but when we did have that fully developed organ, we were able to digest leaves. And that was kind of an adaptation. But once our species moved away from the trees and started eating other things, the appendix became useless, and it actually became bad if you had one, because 10,000 years ago, if your appendix burst, there was no doctors to cut it out of you. You basically died. So it became actually bad to have an appendix, and that's why it's gotten smaller and smaller and smaller in humans. Same thing with the pelvic girdle, which is a pelvis, in whales and in some snakes. The pelvis is basically your hip bones, which hold your leg bones. Well, whales don't have legs, and neither do snakes. Well, why would they need a pelvis? Well, the reason is because they used to have legs. Both snakes and whales used to have legs millions of years ago. Now, they've since lost their legs, but they have yet to lose their pelvis. So that's another evidence of evolution. It shows that these organisms once had legs. They once needed their pelvis. They still have it, but they don't need it anymore. It's become useless. All right, so some little vestigial examples. So this is, of course, the fluke or the tail of a whale. And if you can see, this would be like his spinal cord right there, his vertebra. Some whales still have a femur. A femur is your leg bone, that's your thigh bone. And they still have the pelvis, which attaches to your femur. Well, why in the world would whales need that? Well, that's because about 45 million years ago, whales had legs, folks. Why would they need a pelvis and a femur if they did not? And I don't really like this example, but ostriches, they still have wings, but they're not much use anymore because the ostriches can't fly. But so that's a vestigial structure that says ostriches, their ancestors, millions of years ago, did fly. Now they've lost that adaptation, but they still have their feathers and wings. Another piece of evidence for evolution is embryology. That is that most organisms, especially vertebrates, go through the same embryological developmental stages, and especially early on when they're just an embryo. I mean, if there's a human embryo, there's a pig, there's a tortoise, and there's a lizard. Well, if a doctor showed you a picture of this and said, hey, congratulations, there's your embryo, you'd be like, oh, how cute. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a lizard and a human, or even a pig. Now, as you get closer along, this looks kind of scary, so you'll probably be like, I don't know if that's human or not. Where this is looking more human, and then eventually you can start to see that's obviously a pig. But why would we go through the same embryological developmental stages if we did not have a common ancestor? That we were not all closely related with a common ancestor. That all these, the lizard, the tortoise, the pig, and humans, they're all related. And last but not least, another piece of evidence that organisms of different species, some of them are closely related, especially humans and chimps. We share 99% of the same genes. This is probably the most convincing evidence of evolution because it does show that humans and chimps, we are closely related. Humans and gorillas, we're semi-closely related, but not as close as we are to chimps. So by doing genetic sequencing, finding the order of your A, T, C, and G's, the more you have in common, the more closely related you are. Thank you for listening. I hope you didn't hate it, and hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.